debate about what this means for the future of legal services, for the future of access to justice. And what we want to do today is get some sense of what's happening in Singapore. And we have three extremely well-qualified people to talk us through this. What I'd like to do, rather than introduce them myself, is ask them to say a few words about their background and why it is they're around the table with us today. So if we start off with Jennifer. Jennifer, huge welcome to you.
Sure, thanks very much, Richard. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer. I'm presently an associate with LegalTech's tech practice, where we specialize in tech and fintech matters, including those relating to AI and Web3. Beyond my day job, I also co-founded LawTech Asia, which is a think tank driving thought leadership on the intersection of law, technology, and innovation. I'm also part of the founding steering committee behind the Asia Pacific Legal Innovation Association, or ALITA for short, which is a regional network with over 200 organizations where together we collaborate on development relating to legal innovation and technology in the region. And for me, having grown up designing websites and dabbling a little with HTML, something I'm really passionate about is leveraging law and technology to enhance access to justice. And I'm really excited for our discussion today.
Jennifer, thanks so much. It's just great that you seem to fill your days easily enough. It's just so great that you're so extensively involved with LegalTech. Just ideal. Ken, welcome.
Yes. Thanks, Richard. Well, my name's Ken. I work in the courts in Singapore. My current job is to look after all the transformation and innovation initiatives that we have in the courts. But I've been working on legal tech issues for about 33 years, a little short of your 50 years, Richard, but I'll get there at some point in time.
Not quite 50, thank you.
And so I've had various jobs in the past, all related to legal tech. I've worked as an international law practitioner, as a criminal prosecutor, and currently in the courts, we look after all the court initiatives for access to justice, as well as efficiency in our case management systems.
Well, thanks, Ken. And it is worth calling out your Chief Justice Menon, who is such a leader, not just in Singapore, but globally in advocating the greater use of technology in the courts. Ken, you're more than welcome. Liam, my old friend, welcome round the table. Where are you just now?
I'm in the south of France right now. Actually, about to start a board meeting where one of the topics will be a discussion around what does the current discussion around technology actually, or the future of technology in law actually mean for our company. So that's interesting that we're having these meetings at the same time. So hi, everyone. Thank you, Richard. I'm excited to be with you, Ken and Jennifer. My name's Liam. I am the founder, CEO, and chairman of a law company called Elevate. We're a global 2,000 person business, really offering software and services at the intersection of law and business. Before I started Elevate just over a decade ago, I started and I founded and was the CEO of a company called Integrion, so one of the very early legal process outsourcing businesses, and built that to be a global company as well. And then before that, sort of almost antediluvian, but during the internet 1.0 era in the late 90s, I started one of the very early law tech companies, a company that was focused on a virtual data room that really became a leader in the space, but really showed me that lawyers do adopt technology if it makes their life easier.
Well, Liam, thanks very much. You know what a great admirer I am of your contribution to the alternative and to some extent now mainstream delivery of legal services. But I hope those listening in can see we really have assembled an A-team. Let's dive straight into the detail. What we're trying to do is give people some sense of what's happening in Singapore in legal innovation. I wonder, Jennifer, if you could lead us off just by giving a snapshot of where you think you're at in the use of technology to improve access to justice, to change the way that legal services are delivered, to change the way the law firms operate. Really, the slate is clean. Please just give us your overview.
Sure. So Singapore is a really strong legal innovation hub. And I think part of its strength is due to the strong governmental support. public sector-led implementation and industry partnerships. So on the front of governmental support, besides having grants, our government is unique in that we've launched a LegalTech accelerator, which has helped local and international legal tech startups to scale. And also, I think in terms of the A to J front, what has been interesting to see has been, I guess, both hackathons that are run by law firms. So for instance, Wong Partnership, which is one of the big 4 law firms in Singapore, they actually had a to J or Access to Justice hackathon by collaborating with the NUS Pro Bono Group and various NGOs, and lots of great solutions came out of that, from like chatbots to for migrant workers. And the Singapore Management University Legal Innovation Technology Group also regularly runs Access to Justice hackathons. So I guess that's a bit of a lay of the land from both like the public and private sector.
That's a great summary to kick us off. Liam, you run an international business. What's your perspective, someone who does business in Singapore, but also delivers services in and around the law globally?
You know, I think that the fact that businesses now are operating globally means that when you have these, you know, sort of leading, I suppose in some degrees, jurisdictions that are thrusting forward with their adoption of technology, whether or not it's in the courts or enabling their law firms or access to justice, I think what that really does is it brings along companies that operate globally. And I think that one of the themes that I've seen is that companies that used to sort of have I'll call it a West Coast centric or a UK centric, sort of headquarters centric view of the world, you know, are really increasing. And I know we'll cover all of these things for what are the drivers, but are really having to operate operate in ways that reflect the best in class or the leader jurisdictions. And so I actually find that what's going on in Singapore is a driver of some of the behaviors in global corporations in the law department and the business that the law department serve.
I think that has to be right. And we see it also, Ken, you can comment, in the courts where Singapore is ambitious to be itself a leading global center for dispute resolution, and seems to me at least to be using technology as one of its, or projecting technology, one of its distinctive characteristics. Ken, you can talk about the courts, you can talk about legal services more generally. Give us your snapshot of law tech in Singapore.
Well, at this point in time, Richard, one of the key areas that our Chief Justice is keen to explore is how we can use technology to significantly improve access to justice, especially to those who might be underserved currently. And the recent advances and the recent excitement over generative chat technologies is, of course, something we're tracking very carefully. We are exploring whether or not such technologies can be used to better inform members of the public as to what their legal options might be for a particular dispute, especially perhaps for low-value transactions and low-value disputes. But perhaps even more than that. Perhaps if somebody needs help to write up his statement of claim for a more complex case, can we have a specialized instance of OpenAI's ChatGPT, for example, that is particularly tuned to help draft something for you, to draft an affidavit, draft a statement of claim? Is that possible? How do we get around the hallucination problem that has plagued GPT, at least in its public incarnation? So these are all very exciting times for us. It's a lot of work. We have many irons in the fire. We have a lot of experimentation that's currently going on.
Richard, could I make a comment about that? The two, you know, it seems to me there's an interesting conversation to have about the possibilities for generative AI and in serving the layperson, so A to J. But what is the regulatory oversight responsibility there, which is different from, in my view, going to the panelists being from different perspectives, which is different, I think, from whereas perhaps there's more experimentation on the A to J side. I think while there is lots of experimentation in the corporate side, there is also very rapid clarity around the risks and how to manage those risks, etc. And there is less requirement for regulatory oversight. So I think there's there's sort of multiple threads that we can discuss as a panel around how this affects both the corporate and the public sector elements of law.
Yeah, I think the challenges in each are quite different. And as you say, from a regulatory point of view, different too. Jennifer, that leads us quite naturally to the question of regulation, because Singapore is adopting a slightly different approach to regulation of generative AI. And it's worth, I think, saying a little about this, because what I'm trying to bring out is what is distinctive about the Singapore approach to technology.
I think what is distinctive about Singapore's approach is that currently all around the world, I think just last week, there have been releases of various draft or final model legislations relating to AI, be it in the EU and Australia and previously in China as well. And I think some of these regulations, they create really huge binding obligations as well as gatekeeper liability, especially for generative AI enterprises. And I think the concern here might be with over-regulation at the infancy stage and a regulation of the technology as opposed to the consequences from errant or rogue use of technology. And I think what Singapore's approach is really unique in that Singapore has been leading this by having a model AI governance framework, which it has released, I think in 2020 and edited again in 2021, and has also released companion guidelines to it. But this is where the distinction is. All these are practical guidelines seeking to help businesses implement framework and having good practices for implementing and using and harnessing AI without necessarily creating consequences with teeth as yet. And I think it also comes from a perspective of seeing that, let's say, even if the use of AI went rogue, I think we can rely on our existing processes, like be it for fraud, for deepfakes and things like that, to deal with those consequences. And then we can use a wait and see approach to see where the lacuna in the law is, and then step in to regulate that.
This is fascinating. One of the worries I have is that the interesting and important debates about the existential risks that arise out of AI and how we might regulate and control these, I wouldn't want them to spill over into other areas like justice and health and education, where the clear potential for improved public service is there. And I don't think we want to regulate these systems out of existence before we've actually been prototyping and experimenting. Ken, I wonder if you could comment, and this is still on the issue of legal innovation and so forth in Singapore. You are, as it were, competing, if we can put it this way, with much larger jurisdictions. In some ways, it's analogous to, I would suggest, small businesses competing with large law firms. What advantages do you feel you have, if I'm right in saying this, in being smaller and more agile and able to respond, even from a regulatory point of view, swiftly and emphatically, but in a different way? Do you feel you are in a startup nation, as other countries have been called?
Well, Richard, I wouldn't, to begin with, characterize it as being in competition. We actually love collaborating and discussing with other jurisdictions what are the areas that we can work on and what are the learning points that we might have amassed over the years for all our various legal tech initiatives. So I'm not sure I would characterize it as competition, because I think we're all after the same thing, right? To improve things for the people that we serve and to improve efficiency within the courts. So yes, we do have some advantages from the fact that we are a very small jurisdiction, and we can be quite nimble about how we regulate or how we put out guidelines as to, just by way of example, remote witnessing of affidavits, for example. During the pandemic, we very quickly could come up with guidelines to allow lawyers and deponents to remotely affirm or to swear affidavits, and to put that on very firm footing so there wasn't any likely dispute over whether or not those things can be done. So we do have those advantages. But quite apart from that is, I think we have a very keen spirit of innovation throughout the entire ecosystem, right from the Chief Justice, the Attorneys General, the ministers. I think everybody has a clear focus on the fact that innovation and transformation are key and are things that we need to spend time and energy and, of course, resources on. So we have been experimenting with a lot of things to improve our case management systems. I'll just pause here to mention a bit that one of the disadvantages then is that because we have been a first mover for some of these things, we are in some senses stuck with some things which look as if they were designed in the 90s and the early noughties, which they were, right? So because of that, we actually find that we have to run to stay in place. We have to continually innovate and to improve our services. But it's a fascinating challenge for all of us.
Well, thanks very much. I think it is so important, and you are so fortunate to have support from leadership right across the legal world. That makes just a massive difference. I want to turn now to legal technology trends more generally. I wonder, Liam, if you could kick us off with that. And then afterwards, Jennifer and Ken, you can comment either on LegalTech generally or particular trends within Singapore. But Liam, you've been, as you explained in your introduction, you've been in and around legal technology for decades now. What do you identify sitting in 2023 as the major trends for the coming years?
I mean, I think there are a host of obvious trends, which I don't think are particularly interesting to comment on. But I think the most interesting sort of over the horizon trend that I'm piecing together based on conversations with CIOs of corporations, digital and privacy officers of corporations, general counsel of corporations, other business executives, other members of the C-suite, and then of course law firm leaders and CIOs, is this awareness of how the dots of legal technology might start to join together. So an early indicator of that is this concept of platformization, the idea that instead of building all these point solutions, that people are realizing that the speed, business is moving so quickly that the law department or the law in service of and support of the businesses being able to legally go about business are having to move so much faster, and there is no way to keep up with that. Not only from the kind of the speed of regulation, which we were just, or the courts and that we were just talking about, but actually at the speed of, can you move relevant data between the relevant parts of the business and the supply chain? So platformization, the interconnectedness of things that we've even slightly dismissed. I think of Singapore, for example, as like a blockchain leader and I think that some people will be rolling their eyes and thinking like, yeah, that was yesterday's generative AI hype moment. Okay. But I have a belief that we are going to have sort of the veil will fall from our eyes, and there will be a little bit of like, aha, now we can see how all these pieces are being put together, both from a data perspective, but also from a connected into the other systems that corporations use. And again, I go back to my point. In order to be able to operate to not the lowest common denominator, but the highest common denominator of the global environment. So while Ken's right to say that perhaps it's not competition, and you can see that in things like the UK-Singapore digital economy agreement, I can see collaboration between jurisdictions. The fact of the matter is that if a jurisdiction like Singapore is setting the pace, in the same way that we saw perhaps Europe or in California around data privacy. Once that pace is set, corporations are going to have to keep up. So LegalTech is going to have to keep up and join dots. So that's my sort of sense of the trend or theme that most of us haven't really cottoned onto yet.
Thanks, Liam. I wonder if I could just build on one of these points, because it's been very much in my mind. I think ChatGPT and generative AI are a huge advance, probably the most interesting advance in my lifetime. However, there is a sense in, I think, certainly in the commentary and in all the hype, that it displaces everything that went before, and also a sense perhaps that we've arrived at the end point. And I see with the advance of technology is far more cumulative than that. I don't think this displaces rule-based expert systems. I don't think it displaces the more explicitly predictive systems. I don't think it displaces blockchain and so forth. It's another remarkable enabling technology, and you'll have heard me say this before, which is resulting in our machines becoming increasingly capable. And Liam, I think the joining the dots point is part of that, that we are seeing many of these techniques coalescing into practical applications. But I just urge people not to think this is simply about one enabling technology, because frankly, within 18 months, there's going to be another huge breakthrough. That's the speed of changes we're seeing. And so everyone who set up their generative AI group, it seems to me that that's rather misguided. Anyone who's thinking the idea to the regulatory challenge is generative AI, I think that's similarly misguided. We're on a journey here where we're actually accumulating a whole set of powerful techniques. I felt I had to have that intervention and use my chair's prerogative. Jennifer, from your point of view, I was going to turn to Jennifer first of all. Jennifer, just you can focus either on legal technology trends generally or in Singapore, but over to you.
Sure. So I think one trend, I mean, obviously AI is one of the greatest trends, and I thought maybe I just share that one of our Singapore legal tech startups, Intellect, has already come up with a AI-based solution where it is called Scott, where what it does is that it answers legal research queries in natural language, and also based on these kinds of smart search, similar to how you would speak to ChatGPT, it can recommend cases in your library with the relevant annotations. And so I guess this is the closest you can get in Singapore today to, I guess, your own local research virtual assistant. And Richard, I completely agree with your other point about not forgetting all the technologies that were before AI. And I thought I'd just perhaps remind everyone about some other exciting developments. So previously, there were lots of interesting Web3 developments in the online dispute resolution space as well. So there's this concept of decentralized dispute resolution. So I think COVID has made us more familiar with the idea of online dispute resolution, and all of us are already familiar with the concept of arbitration. But decentralized arbitration as a means of online dispute resolution might be something that is new to everyone. And one of the key market players in this space is actually Claros. And how decentralized arbitration works is that, for instance, if there was a cross-jurisdictional dispute between a web designer in China and a client in London over the quality of the website that was produced, what would happen is that by using Claros, parties could refer their disputes to be resolved by peer-to-peer decentralized arbitration. And how this works is that the parties can select their own arbitrators, and their arbitrators can be other web designers located in other jurisdictions. And the key advantage of this is that they can vote on two very practical things: whether the quality of the website was subpar, and in the end, the amount of fees that should be paid to the web developer. And because before the assignment was made, for instance, if it was for $5,000, the client would have already put $5,000 on escrow on the smart contract in this system. Once the judgment and decision is out, for instance, if only $3,000 should go to the Chinese web developer, then the smart contract process would just move the $3,000 over to the web designer, and there you have it, enforceability and all that just on the blockchain. And the key benefit of this and why it contributes to access to justice is not just in terms of speed and avoiding years of court litigation, but also it really helps with the cross-jurisdictional aspect, because there's a huge cost to that. Yeah.
Jennifer, that's fascinating and refreshing from my point of view that we're not just focusing on generative AI. I should say, incidentally, for those of you listening in, we will take questions during the discussion. So please do put any questions you have in Q&A. Ken, from your point of view, legal technology trends.
Yeah. You know, Richard, I was just going to riff off what you said about not forgetting about other things and falling into the trap of thinking that generative AI is the be-all and end-all. So one of the things that I've always been concerned about where chatbots are proposed to me is that all the demonstrations that you see from Google, Microsoft, would have somebody talk to a chatbot and say, hey, please get me a restaurant that serves Japanese food within 1 kilometer of my office for next Tuesday. Now, all those things demo incredibly well. And everybody looks at that and say, aha, we should do this for the legal profession. And this would make a fantastic change for access to justice. And I look at that and I say, no, I don't think so. You know, and I think we actually cannot expect somebody to talk to a chatbot and say, hey, you know, chatbot, my brother passed away last week and he left a will. I'm the executor. What are the next steps that I need to take in order to get grant of probate so that I can administer his bank account? Nobody is going to go to a chatbot with all those nuggets of information all ready to give to the chatbot. So my short point is, that you can't expect a chatbot to do the things that perhaps demo very well for the technology companies. And I think there is still a space for the stuff that you worked on in the 1980s, you know, the sort of guided process flows that you talked about then, that you worked on back then, that where we might want to lead somebody down the garden path. All right, your brother passed away. Did he leave a will? Or did he not leave a will? All right, he left a will. Are you the named executor? You know, there probably is still a space for those things. And I think that it would be a mistake to think that generative text, well, will take care of everything. We don't need to worry about those things anymore.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's interesting that in the Civil Resolution Tribunal in British Columbia, Solution Explorer is absolutely a rule-based expert system. Yep. One of the dangers, I think, in thinking about technology, of course, is I sometimes call it technological myopia. It's evaluating the future potential of a technology in terms of what we have today. We're still very much at the experimental prototype stage for much that's going on in generative AI. The thing I look forward to, and I don't know technologically how it will be delivered, is where systems are more interactive in the sense they start to ask us questions. Because one of the great strengths and characteristics of a professional advisor is that they themselves can categorize and classify problems and issues based on their knowledge. Liam, you have a background in medicine, you'll remember this, but it's the doctor who said, have you been on holiday to East Africa recently? Who throws out that question that for the patient may seem irrelevant. Now, everyone's talking just now about prompt engineers, and rightly it is interesting that the better you are at interacting with these systems, the more you're likely to derive from them. Seems to me self-evident that in due course, these prompt engineers, the work of prompt engineers will be replaced by the system's improved interface. But we may get to the stage where there's a kind of almost like a rule-based expert systems front end on the one hand, or where the systems themselves can begin to interact and help classify and categorize and guide you through. And frankly, if we're going to help people understand their entitlements reliably without lawyers, we need that level of sophistication of system. Let's just take a question from the floor, as it were. An anonymous attendee says they'd love to hear, how do you narrow the gap between the old-fashioned lawyer's work and the world of AI-based information systems? Liam, do you see them as two worlds, or is there some kind of symbiosis there? We can bring them.
I think the question is probably about the near term. I'll answer the near term in a moment. I would like to answer the longer term element to that. I think it follows on from your statement. at risk of people switching off, I'm quite a believer that what I call this machine intelligence, while it is different from human or biological intelligence, there are great similarities about how the machine learns to how humans learn. And I happen to personally be a believer that these the machine intelligences will learn the rules and will actually teach themselves through interaction the ability to determine what questions to ask and what sequence, just in the same way that as a young doctor or a young lawyer, one learns the sequence of questions to ask and narrows them and where to actually make sure we consider outliers. I think in the nearer term, I spent a lot, about 5 years ago, I bought Elevate bought a law, an AI company for law, a company called LexPredict. It was led by many people know, Dr. Dan Katz and Mike Bomarito, and it was fascinating for me to see how hard it was to get all the lawyers in my company, who, by the way, they join Elevate because they want to run a different race. They want to practice differently. It was really fascinating to see all of the similar change challenges at a supposedly alternative or new law company, and it was like I could have been inside many of the law firms that I think that that we advise, where customers ask, well, how can we get our lawyers to work differently? I think the difference between getting lawyers to use Gen AI and using other legal technologies is really based upon there's a strong sense of fear, which leads, and people's response to that fear is either instant dismissal, I don't want to spend time on it, or perhaps a sort of over embrace of or belief in what it can do. And I think that my advice, I think about the experiments we're doing internally, the experiments we're doing with law departments, experiments we're doing with law firms. There are basic change management. Change for humans isn't any different today as it was, in my view, 20 years ago or even 100,000 years ago. So, be very careful about managing expectations and setting expectations and scoping what problem we're trying to solve. Work with those lawyers who are enthusiastic, but they are not dogmatic true believers or dogmatic naysayers. And just think of yourself. If you hear from one of your friends about this great experience they had with a piece of software or you are more likely to embrace, I'll take a look at that. So it's at this point, I think it's a waste of time to have 100, the sort of, let 1,000 or flowers bloom. I think that is just a lot of energy that's going to go nowhere. I would encourage us all to spend time with the rational, practical, tech-minded lawyers, and I'm thinking of people on this call as well. People like us. Work with them to come up with something that is achievable, makes a difference, and they, as the social connectors, will tell their friends about. But be realistic and practical about the work that's going to be involved. The naysayers, don't spend any time on those at the moment.
That's a great contribution. Thanks so much. The reality is, with many naysayers, there's no amount of argument or evidence are going to shift them. If we can bring, I'm always slightly skeptical, and this may sound ridiculous because I am a bit evangelical with myself, but the evangelists are already there, as it were. In some ways, it's the agnostics and the mild believers who are in the mainstream, we need to bring through. I wonder if we could switch directions slightly, and we've hinted at it already. But the public conversation has shifted in this direction over the last few years, away from the use of technology by law firms and major corporate clients to the use of technology to help promote access to justice, to improve the way that people can understand and enforce their entitlements. And the context I always give here is the OECD statistics, which suggest that only 46% of people in our world have realistic access to lawyers and judges. And I say to all lawyers, even lawyers working in major corporate deals and so forth, for the legal profession, this is a disgrace. This is happening in our watch, and I think we're now seeing more than a glimmer of ways in which we can actually improve in that situation. So I wondered, Ken, if you can take the lead here, the use of technology in promoting justice, and indeed in the most general terms, the use of online courts and online dispute resolution.
Well, let me deal with the possibilities that might be available in generative text first. So the Singapore courts, we have a whole bunch of brochures that we make available, and these brochures tell people what their rights are in different areas, in divorce, mental capacity applications, and so on and so forth. The problem with them is some of these brochures can be very large, or some of the handbooks can be massive handbooks. One of the handbooks we have is a 55-page handbook, right? To expect a layperson to make his way through a 55-page handbook is just fanciful. So what we see as being possible is, can I feed this to a ring-fenced generative text bot that will then answer questions based on just the information I feed it, thereby minimizing the risk of hallucinations and what have you, right? And we see a lot of people using the GPT technology in this direction. There's Chat PDF, for example, which is already out there, where you just upload a PDF and then you can go talk to the PDF. So we're exploring ring-fenced instances of GPT that make use of GPT technology, but will try and stay confined within the various documents that we feed that bot, with source attribution as well, so that you know where and why it gives you a particular answer. So we think that that potentially can work. But I can tell you that at the back of my mind, I worry about the fact that all this is still on the assumption that somebody is willing to use a chatbot, willing to type in language and in English in particular. And from a multilingual society, that is a concern, right? I cannot assume that every person that might have a legal or might have a problem that can be solved by proper application of legal rules would know how to use English to converse with a chatbot. So I need to worry about that. So in the big picture issue of access to justice, we look at high-tech solutions, but we also think about the high-touch solutions that we need. And some of the high-touch solutions could well be provided by organizations that make it their job to go out there and to deal with people on the ground who have problems in the housing estates, in the actual areas they work with that are in a non-intimidating environment. To expect people to come into a courthouse, to walk past the metal detectors, to ask for help, or to use a conversational electronic chatbot may not work for part of the population that is underserved. So that's part of the problem, and we think that if we truly want to solve access to justice, we cannot be overly focused on high tech. We also need to think about high touch solutions.
I agree with that, but there is a mindset issue here, isn't there, that we don't need to solve it in one leap. I thought we're looking for improvement rather than perfection. And if we can introduce tools that improve our service, that in some occasions can help people more rapidly understand whether or not even it's worth pursuing an action in the court, there's benefits we can bring. And so I see this as an incremental transformation rather than a big bang revolution. Liam.
Could I just ask, I wonder if this is the kind of thing that might be applicable. It's not, we have a global corporate customer headquartered in Singapore who recently worked on empowering its employees to be able to talk to its HR policies around the world. So it allowed HR. So I think this is going along the path you're talking about, Ken. And the point is, I know it wasn't quite at the access to justice of the layperson, but it really was a very specific thing that was inside a box of ring fence, and it provided the ability for lay employees to be able to actually get better or self-service for something that had been previously so dense, our global HR policy, that all they did was they typically resorted, to your point, Ken, to the high touch. They typically resorted to calling the HR department. They rarely called the legal department, as you might imagine, I think that's a good illustration or an adjacent illustration of how there may be from the corporate world that may be relevant to A to J.
Yes, and it's a little bit off topic from access to justice, but I do think that for HR related matters, generative text chatbots can be a game changer, right? You can talk to your chatbot and ask about leave policies, even order up a new set of name cards, and all that can be done without a human being involved. And I think all those are fantastic innovations. Like I said, my challenge is, does that work for the layperson who struggles and to put together a sentence in English, right? And again, from the context of a multilingual society, I need to worry about that. Or do I trust stringing together a GPT solution together with a Google Translate or some other translation engine and expect it to all mesh well together? I would currently still be a little bit concerned about that. Yeah.
I've always looked at it slightly differently. The question I've asked myself is, can I see this within 10 years? I've often asked that question. And certainly when I was working in the 80s, I couldn't see this stuff within 10 years. I could write about it as I did in 2012, the next 20 years. But a lot of what you're saying now, instinctively, I think machine translation improving rapidly. I think first generation ChatGPT already amazing, quality of chat phenomenal. Can I imagine a system that will interact with someone of limited education, limited linguistic abilities? Over the next 2 or 3 years, no. Over the next 10 years, yes. But this, in the grand arc of human history, I think we have to be taking a longer term view. I understand if you're in the business of legal technology, you're thinking, what does this mean for my revenues over the next couple of years? On this subject, given, as you know, how slow it is to change, I look back to the mid-90s when I advised, and we had a big review by a senior judge in England and Wales, and we talked about technology, and that was in 1995, for goodness sake. And a lot of what we were saying then has still yet to come to fruition. So I think we've got to look at this at the long term. Liam, I wondered if you were hinting at that earlier, because you put the long term to one side, but didn't come back on it. But I'll come back to that in 2 seconds. Jennifer, you've spoken to us about decentralized arbitration. Did you have anything to add on the subject of access to justice and online dispute resolution?
Yes, so on the topic of access to justice, the way I see how AI can revolutionize existing solutions would be, for instance, Microsoft has recently released Copilot, and it's how it is integrated in Microsoft Word. And what is revolutionary about Copilot is that it takes ChatGPT and AI to another level. You can tell it to draft a 2-page proposal based on data from a meeting minutes and with reference to a precedent of how a previous proposal looks like. And I think this could potentially revolutionize how access to justice could be delivered for litigants in person. So I think currently A to J solutions already are looking at how we can have chatbot automation to create automatic form generators and things like that. But if we could even use Copilot for that, for instance, after a legal clinic case notes, it could be draft a statement of claim based on the data from the notes from a legal clinic and with reference to a precedent of a blank anonymized statement of claim for a similar offense. For instance, if it's a criminal defense work, I think that could be how A to J, that could really be a true game changer for A to J in future.
I'm glad you went in that direction, because a lot of the discussion about the remarkable Microsoft plans and so forth has been very focused on lawyers. In fact, the general discussion about generative AI, if you look at most of the press commentary and the media commentary, has been asking the question, what does this mean for law firms? Which I think is quite funny, because when there's a big medical breakthrough, people don't say, what does this mean for doctors? They're asking, what does it mean for patients? And so we have a remarkably provider-centric view of all of this. So I was glad you switched from, frankly, what is remarkable automation of existing law firms to see how this could potentially in access to justice term, be disruptive because it's a new way of empowering the citizen. Liam, can I take you back to the long term? Because I think you were wanting to make a couple of observations and you left that hanging for us.
Well, I think you know, I just have a real life experience of it in my own family. You know, I have an immigrant mother that and I hope, you know, if she ever watches this, she won't mind me saying this, but she has limited education and limited English skills, reading and writing ability, and she had a very significant court case that could have ended up in jail, you know, a few years ago. And to your point about at that time, I couldn't imagine her having anything other than a lawyer help her, and you know, and she was about to walk into a courtroom having had no advice, and so it was and you know, but we have we come from a challenged socioeconomic background. You know, she didn't have any money for this. It was something that she was embarrassed about. Therefore didn't tell me about this. Found out about it just before this happened. So, you know, we retained a lawyer. But I think about now, I can imagine going to my point about machine intelligence is teaching themselves. And also to Jennifer's point about the systems we have in place that can actually provide guardrails and remediate the problems that are going to emerge. So I'm not going to say that they aren't going to emerge, but I can imagine that a lot of people asking a machine intelligence the kinds of questions that she could have had a conversation about that would have given her, like she has a general practitioner in her community, because there is no general legal practitioner in the community. She, amongst a crowd of others, could have interfaced with I believe I can imagine a machine intelligence that will learn rules and actually learn what questions to ask, even though I know that it will be guided in the early stages. But I believe it will very quickly learn. I believe it will very, very quickly learn. So I don't think that even if we had 1,000 people, that I can imagine a situation where 1,000 people or 10,000 people will teach a machine intelligence the ability to have that general practitioner, legal practitioner level of access to justice.
Yeah, a couple of things that arise out of that, although of course instructing lawyers is hugely helpful and often life-saving for people, there is, as a generality across the profession, something slightly disempowering about instructing professionals. You're handing over huge issues to other people. And I've heard doctors saying that one of the great things, not all doctors agree with this, but one of the great things about being able to Google is that people are taking more responsibility for their own illness. And I think similarly, when you get lost in the legal process, although you have the comfort of an advisor, you really are alienated from the process. And I can see something very empowering here. The second thing is, insofar as, and I don't know the details of your mum's case, but insofar as a dispute involves a very unlevel playing field, where there's one party that's well lawyered and one who isn't. What we've seen in a number of places around the world is that where there are systems and processes that allow people, even without lawyers, to get to the stage of, say, with Money Claim Online in the UK, of being able to deliver court documents to the other side, that of itself can change behaviors. So what fascinates me is not just how the court dispute resolution process might be changed, but also how it is that if we empower other people, we may be able to avoid disputes from escalating, for example. There's quite a practical questions come through. What do you expect about the future? Will most of our financial income be from the sale of legal technologies and fewer consulting hours? So that's really the business model question, because the business model of most professional firms is that they essentially sell their people at much more than they pay them. And the more people you sell, the broader the pyramid, the more profitable you are. But what we're potentially seeing here is a move away from economic productivity based on human labor to essentially the licensing of content and the delivery of systems. So, I mean, Liam, back to you again, and then Jennifer, and then Ken. Is there a fundamental change of business model impending here, do you think?
there's certainly an opportunity for that. And I think if you look at the case study, if you look at McKinsey's, where the McKinsey today in 2023 generate most of their profits, and compare that to where they generated most of their profits in 2003, you'll see that has been a transformation, that they have had both fantastic profit generation from their digital offerings, as well as growth in demand in their advisory offerings, which, by the way, are very closely linked to their digital offerings in terms of data, etc. So I think there's a fantastic opportunity for those lawyers, individual lawyers, and law firms that choose to embrace it.
Jennifer, over to you. What do you think in terms of the business model? You work with a Magic Circle firm. I wouldn't ask you to comment on the firm particularly unless you wish to, but do you see an impending shift in business model, or do you see the dominant thinking is that technology essentially streamlines, sustains, and optimizes the current way of working?
So, I mean, my views are my own, not my firm's, but personally, I really believe that the use of technology can only transform the way we work. And if we're more efficient lawyers, I think increasingly more and more clients are opting and looking towards fixed fee models. So if we become more efficient and quicker, then that would also mean greater profit margins for us. And so it's honestly a win-win for the industry as a whole. And I think it will also then free us up to focus on more high value and strategic work, as well as, I mean, currently all the innovation we've been talking about has been focused on process innovation, which is basically about how we redeliver our existing legal services in maybe a faster, smarter, more efficient way. But how about product innovation in terms of thinking about the types of products that we can bring to our clients? So I think having more efficient processes will then free us up to then think about more innovative products and better products that we can give to our clients.
I think you've drawn a key distinction, because in fact, moving from hourly billing to fixed fee is not change of the business model, it's a change of the charging model, because the underlying business model, it seems to me, is still charging for human beings to do work. You might charge them differently. The development of new products that you essentially will be licensing is an entire shift in business model. And one of the consequences of this is that the growth strategies of many professional firms, which is to build larger armies of human providers, perhaps doesn't make sense. But if there's a shift towards a business model that is essentially based on licensing IP rather than charging for the time of human beings. Ken?
Yeah, Richard, I was just going to chime in to say that I agree pretty much that some of these things are going to lead to a challenge to law firms, because they simply won't be able to charge the amount that they used to charge if they insist on keeping with the hourly billing paradigm. It's been 25 years since I saw a law firm demonstrate to me how hot docs can be used to generate at least a starting draft of an agreement in less than half an hour, which previously might have taken 6 billable hours, right? And if the law firm didn't embrace the fact that we now have this technology, we will need to charge on a per piece rate, with the expert review of that draft document being what we charge for, and not the 6 hours of prep time, then you're just going to lose revenue, and then you're going to find this to be a massive challenge. One more little point.
One more little point then, Liam.
Right. Just very quickly.
Yeah, Liam then Ken.
Yeah, Ken, just on that, it's interesting, I am in the business of in the business of providing legal services and legal software. And what has been fascinating for me is that when the lawyers have embraced, I think about our contracting service, for example, our contracting business, when the lawyers have moved to I provide services by the output. The machines create the first draft. Our expert contracting lawyers then review that draft. But they really have come to, and it's disconnected from how they're paid. Okay, they've really leapt in with both feet. So I think you really are onto something, and it's just a question of getting enough people to actually adopt this new way of working or these new economic models?
Ken, you can respond, but I'd also like you to lace into that the question of why it is, if at all, you think, and this is the focal point of this discussion, that Singapore might be better placed than other places to achieve that shift.
Well, I'm not sure Singapore is a better place, but I think that we do have the right leadership to nudge the members of the profession, hopefully to move in this direction. But in many senses, there is really nothing new under the sun, because 30 years ago, you would send a first-year associate to note up a case, all right, to find the subsequent procedural history of a particular precedent that you might wish to cite in your submissions or in your legal advice. And that, young lawyer would run to the library, pull up case citators to look for this particular citation and whether or not there's been any subsequent discussion about that case. I'm not sure many of us have even seen a case citator in the past 30 years, right? Because these days, Westlaw, Lexis would tell you the subsequent procedural history of a particular case in seconds, right? So all those hours that you previously would have billed for that first-year associate to go note up the half a dozen cases that might be relevant for a particular scenario that is presented to the firm, they were no longer chargeable, right? But the profession has evolved, and nobody bemoans the fact that, oh, I couldn't charge for those 3 hours, right? And I do wish that at some point in time, we would reach the situation that you avert to a couple of minutes ago, Richard, where somebody goes to a doctor and says, hey, I've checked this up, and I think that the pain in my leg might be because of these reasons. Can you help me investigate a little bit further? Where the legal profession is concerned, would we have a citizen come in and say, hey, I think I have this problem. I think I would like to explore these legal options. Can you advise me on that?
Thank you, Ken. We've got less than a minute to run. Jennifer, can you take us home just in 30 seconds? An answer to my question about Singapore being better placed or not to exploit these existing and emerging technologies.
Sure, I think Singapore is definitely progressive because and the best place to exploit these technologies, because our government also has a really collaborative approach in terms of seeking industry feedback and consultations with reference to regulations. And there are also exciting developments such as electronic bills of lading and blockchain-based smart contracts. So this ties in with what I mentioned about new product innovation that lawyers could move into. Like perhaps we could move more into working with clients on automating their contracts and creating smart contracts for their processes. And this is something that the government, which prides itself on efficiency and productivity, would definitely support.
Wonderful. I'm going to have to call things to a close here. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, NetLaw Media, for hosting. Thank you, Liam, Ken, and Jennifer, for contributing. This is much too much fun to call work. Thank you for listening in. I look forward to seeing you all again at the next Tech Talk.
Thanks a lot.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.